It is Friday, the 14th of March, 2025, Friday, and it is a full moon eclipse. It's the season, just the season. And so I have straight away some posts I made on my Instagram, social media, and really good points made in this post. And so, in light of everything that I've been sharing, and more information that's been coming out, even in mainstream media, I felt that this was a good time to share this. I still haven't looked at any updates on the peace deal between America and Russia, but I will do that at some point today. Anyway, Putin was allowed to speak on Croatia TV. What did he say? He addressed the Europeans. Russia has never been and never will be your enemy. We do not want European raw materials and wealth. We have our own raw materials and wealth. We absolutely do not need your raw materials. Russia is the richest country in the world in terms of raw materials. He says that a lot. Raw materials. Anyways, we do not want your land or your territory. Look at how wide Russia is on the map. Russia is twice the size of the whole of Europe in one place. What do we need your land for? What do we do with it? Why do you think Russia is an enemy of Europe? What damage has Russia done to you? Okay, so here, obviously I have some disagreements with this about land. He has taken over more land that Ukraine had claimed. And so there's that going on, right? He's taken more land since March of 2022. Oh my God, it's been that long. So that is not entirely true. And so what do you think? What damage has Russia done to you? Well, I mean, he has also been involved in this war, and so there's a lot of Ukrainian infrastructure that has been completely decimated from both sides. But that is damage that's going to take generations to repair. And there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done even before that happens. And so, but he's right about the raw materials and land. Although I do believe that the northern regions of Earth, I do believe they're smaller than what is being projected on the fake globe Earth maps, the Google Earth that we get. We know that the continent sizes are incorrect, like even with Greenland, even with Africa, etc. And in the scientific community, that's actually recognized. But I digress. Why do you think Russia is an enemy of Europe? What damage has... Okay, so have we sold you... This is where it gets interesting. Have we sold you gas and raw materials at lower prices than the prices at which your friends are currently selling you? Yes, that's true. Like so many different countries in Europe, they were, like, even during this war, they're still buying their oil from and their raw materials from Russia, and at significantly lower prices than they would get anywhere else. And so that is a fair point. Did Russia sacrifice 20 million people in World War II to get rid of the Nazis? Yes, another fair point. And look at what's going on in Ukraine right now and see his concerns with that and American and Canadian involvement. Was Russia the first country to help Europe during the COVID pandemic? Yes. Did we help Europe when there were fires and natural disasters? Yes. Russia, what has Russia done to you that you hate so much? So he has a lot of fair points. If he's excluding Ukraine in this situation especially, I like this point at the end. Russia is not your enemy. Your real enemies are your leaders, those who lead you. And I totally believe that as well. I've called Zelensky out numerous times. This is just my friggin' point to some Canadians out there that are losing it. Spare me your fake outrage. You didn't bat an eye when Trudeau buried billions on useless climate schemes, funded foreign dictators, or bailed out failing media companies to push his propaganda, but suddenly tariffs are the problem. Wake up, you're already paying more because of Trudeau. Like, this is true. And with Carney, it's going to be worse for us, not for him. And there's even more. But yeah, people are like the fake outrage. Like, where were you during COVID? Like, oh yeah, one of the unvaccinated to die. So this guy, former
forces.
Okay, so former border agent claims cartels have compromised Canada's government.
Transnational gangs have compromised government agencies, helping terrorists and spies enter Canada. Luke Sabrin, a former CBSA officer, alleges that the CBSA databases and operations have been compromised, aiding the entry of dangerous individuals into Canada. He warns that Canada's security is at risk due to systemic corruption and the failure of accountability measures. Sabrin's allegations align with concerns raised in a 2019 CBSA threat brief, which warned of transnational criminal organizations exploiting CBSA systems and personnel.
When these things happen, you have to take action, or people like you and I don't trust our institutions anymore. When you have the Sinaloa cartel somehow baked into our government institutions and they're able to threaten a CBA officer's kids at his house. So when that happens, you're kind of going, oh, there's no rules. Give credit to this guy for even saying anything. If you've got a gang of people that can come into my country and do whatever you want, and you have that kind of push, and I'm the one that loses because other CBSA agents are
And when your government is backing them and not you, even more terrifying. And this is coming more and more. It's already been trained for the last few years, especially, and I know this for a fact. And for people from other countries to come into people's countries where there's possible radicals or dissenters or people that are speaking the truth and targeting them specifically. And interesting times.
Compromise to give me my information up. What the hell is happening here? So yeah, no, I mean, like I said, all credit to the guy.
Canadian border security.
So Luke said, right, like, what a hero, like that, and his family being impacted because of exposing this, because no one's doing anything about it, because at the highest level, this is where it's being instigated. It's just wild times. Yeah, more squirrels and raccoons have been arrested than anyone in Epstein's client list. And again, I don't think it's going to come out. I don't think like the full JFK truth is going to come out just because of the people involved and how this makes people go down and connect more dots, go further down rabbit holes and connect more dots regarding NASA, like I said, fake moon landings, and just like how many billions of dollars a year is being wasted on fraud. And so it's all connected and it's the same people that were covering it up and targeting people that were exposing it. It's all connected. That's my dogs. Yeah, Stephen Guilbeault fired. Super exciting. That's why I'm doing the video on climate fraud, because there have been a lot of experts, and you're going to see that in that video, but that were slamming what this guy was saying, like he absolutely did not know what he was talking about, and because of that, there had been billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, our money, that got wasted, and it was largely like at the bureaucratic level or at the admin level, right? Like salaries of people that were pushing the agenda, right? And I'm sorry that they're losing their jobs, but it's a fraud. And that's not what taxpayers' money is supposed to go towards at all. All right, it's supposed to go to things that actually work for Canada, and things that we can actually do to mitigate the pollution and the toxins that we're allowing in our country because of people like this, and we're funding it. And so I hope he loses his security clearance if he has one. I hope that he never is able to work in government again. President Trump, that's a good thing that government is doing in the U.S. that I think would be good here as well. Removing people's security clearances, not allowing them to have access to certain government facilities, etc. Not being able to even work with contractors for the government, and them having to provide like that information, who they're working with, to the federal level, and then like that makes it where they were going to be targeting those companies that actually hire them as well, and possibly cancel like making them have no further services with the government as well, so losing their contracts with government, and these are very large sums of money. So it's really clever.
Images. Explain why we're not getting to see these images live. The Apollo 11 landing was broadcast live. Why
now don't we have the technology to see all of this live?
And we're getting a picture on the TV. Got a good picture, huh?
He's on the moon.
And the second man is on the moon.
Neil Armstrong getting ready to move the TV camera now out to the panorama position.
Okay, as far as distance goes, Neil, and we'll line you up again when you finish the panorama. Tell me if you got a picture here.
Oh, we got a beautiful picture, Neil.
issues with file transfers. We did have a number of communications glitches. We had either forward or return link problems.
Also, during coast in the zero gravity of environment of space,
It's very difficult to transmit on the fly, if you will, and get that all the way back to Earth.
struggle to get communications.
Unfortunately, they're going to be in the darkness. They will not be sunlit, so we won't get very good video of them.
Explain why we're not getting to.
It was interesting that Joe Rogan had Bart Zabrell on his show talking about the fact that the moon landings have been all a hoax, every single one of them from every single country, and they come up with drastically different versions of what the globe looks like from space. All this shit, different colors, different shapes and sizes of continents, etc. And it's like, why don't you guys talk with each other? Like, if you were so bad at it that you weren't just like, hey, US, like, since you guys were allegedly the first ones to go on the moon, can you give us some of that fake footage and those fake images so that we can like all be on the same page here? Like, this is what I mean. Like, this is like, they are not the elite. Like, they're hiring people that are the like the most brilliant geniuses of our time, and exploiting them for money. Just like people on the Epstein list, right? That's exactly what that was for. And there were multiple different government agencies across the world, including the Five Eyes community, which I care more about because I love my country, and they're still getting away with it. Massively psyopsed and captured. And I wish that Sean Ryan would talk about moon landings with people that could represent and articulate the reasons why well, or other podcasters. I think JP Sears has talked about it, but he said that we most definitely went on the moon. So maybe he was being sarcastic. I don't know.
Explain why we're not.
Yeah, so this is again for people that are friggin' there's more alleged possible popularity for the Liberals in the last couple of weeks, and that's terrifying. And so Mark Carney, today, he's going to be sworn in as Canada's Prime Minister officially, and then likely going to be elections immediately afterwards, because he's not going to want to have more time in the spotlight and have more people dig into his dirty background and his wife's, before elections. Like, he wants this to be immediate. Ugh.
Trump wants to make us the 51st state. Trump wants to make us the 51st state. How dare he? Oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to boo a 15-year-old girl singing the U.S. national anthem at the Raptors game. Yeah, that'll show them. So let me get this straight. Arguably the greatest empire of all time, the most powerful nation in the world, and maybe even in history, wants us to be a part of their country. Why is this such an insult? Why are we taking this so personally? Like Pierre has said, we should be one of the wealthiest and most powerful nations on earth, and Trump sees that potential. There's also a lot of arguments of why this would be great for Canada. And I don't know if you've been following how Canada has been doing, but it's about as bad as we possibly could. Now, I'm not saying we should join the US, and no one has walked through a plausible scenario of how that would even occur, because it doesn't exist. It's not going to happen. So calm your little tatas, my friends, okay? Now, if we had a strong and savvy leader, I'd be open to negotiating a union between Canada and the US, but we don't yet. No, Kaylor, it's the tariffs. How dare he? Guys, he's putting tariffs on everyone. Trump's obligation is to the United States, my friends. It's not to Canada. He's doing what he feels will protect his country, like a strong leader does, and I'm jealous. I wish we had one. And it's amazing to me how many of you have sat idle while your country has slowly been destroyed for the last 9 years, and you do and say nothing, and now that Trump is challenging us, you're suddenly all up in arms. My friends, Trump isn't our problem. We are our problem. I hate victim mentality.
Yep.
We need to stop pointing our finger to anyone except for us. We need to all start being this politically engaged and take this passion and put it towards focusing on us and getting our fucking country back. Focus on Trump and bitching and complaining and booing their national anthem, we're going to lose. Focus on electing a stronger, more savvy leader and acting like we aren't a bunch of weak, victim-minded assholes, we can win. Guys, I believe in this country. This country is beautiful. The rest of the world doesn't know it yet, but it really is. I've seen it. And that means that we all have to start acting like winners. And that's all the way up to our government, our leadership, our corporations, our families, our communities, and our citizens. We all have to start acting like we are winners. And that's the fucking vibe today, baby.
That was so good. And what happened? I obviously agree with him wholeheartedly. I'm just going to pause this. And I'm going to carry on with a couple more stories. But like I'm seeing more in the news. I've talked about this before, and I just wanted to discuss the hypocrisy in this as well as I can. But people on the left, Democratic types, I would argue they're radicals and fully psyops. They are continuing to target people with Teslas, including trying to run them off the roads. They're spray painting Nazi signs, and they're not putting a circle in in a cross or a line through it either to say that like they're anti-Nazis. So you're promoting Nazism and shooting at people at dealerships. They're like again more damage, just like the Portland protests. People like attacking law enforcement. Like what the fuck is wrong with you? Attacking innocent business owners. Fires, so much destruction, taking over a police precinct, shooting kids, driving over people. Like it's just so insane to me that these are they're supposed to be like so tolerant. They're tolerant of people that claim to be MAPS and are proud of it, minor attracted purse. They're fully embracing and accepting of that. They're fully accepting and embracing of people that have abortions in their third trimester, and even after friggin' birth. And so many other things like the lockdowns they fully supported, which was ironic to me as well. But they've caused so much destruction, and they accept, and like even people without genitalia, so men that get turned down by wearing women's clothing or being in women's spaces. So again, this has nothing to do with being trans. It has everything to do with being a sexual fetish. You're allowing these men to go into our women's spaces. You're fully accepting of all of this stuff, but so intolerant when you're like the psyops that's being pushed at you, fear mongering. It's all fear mongering, by the way. Like you're actually believing it, right? About the government shutdowns and how it's going to impact people. How Trump is targeting veterans. How Trump is targeting trans people. How he's all of this. It's been such bullshit, and it's usually people on the right now, and the irony in that. They've been so much more tolerant, and how we've been protesting if we don't agree with certain agendas or narratives because we know it's causing harm to our society. For example, the whole woke DEI movement, and with Dylan Mulvaney, people just stopped buying that beer. That was literally it, and it completely collapsed that narrative, right? And then they started circling back and changing the narrative and changing their advertisements and their marketing campaigns and all of this stuff. That's all it took. No one got hurt in that. There were no people that were, drinking that beer that were getting attacked. This is insane. They weren't targeting the plants where they were like these like the beer was made. All they did was just stop buying it. And then even with Netflix, or with Disney movies or with movies in general that are pushing a very clear psyops, propaganda, woke DEI message agenda, and they're just not buying the products. Just don't buy the products. Teslas have already been bought, so you're not actually impacting the dealership anyways by doing that. But you're causing them a lot of damage, and you're ruining people's lives. But anyway, and so all you had to do was just not buy the product if you don't like it. But you can't do that, of course not, because you're intolerant and not at all democratic or liberal. So spare me. And then again, the people that you prop up and accept in your community. So yeah, this is just an example. I got a Cybertruck a couple of weeks ago, and people are literally trying to run me off the road on the highway. This is crazy. Like this could be someone's grandmother, someone's father, someone's brother, someone's child. They're unhinged. And this I'm blaming on politicians on the left and right. I'm blaming mainstream media trying to box me in parking spots to make it difficult to get out, throwing me up at the middle fingers and screaming at me and calling me a Nazi. It's insane. The world has gone nuts. This is wild. All you had to do was just not buy the product. But instead you had to go crazy again. Oh, this is a good one. More on Mark Carney getting sworn in today.
Watch this. I'm going to summarize it as quickly as I can, but this is when Mark Carney was in charge. It's called Brookfield's Climate Paradox. It literally looks at their pledges, what they tell you and I, and the fossil fuel reality. It's insane. It specifically states facts do not square with promises touted by Brookfield executive and net zero advocate Mark Carney. Brookfield portrays itself as a climate-friendly investor, but with over 215 fossil fuel assets emitting nearly 159 million metric tons of CO2 annually, their actions paint a different picture. And here's the crazy part. The emissions figure is nearly 14 times higher than the figures Brookfield discloses in its most recent sustainability report, and greater than the CO2 emissions produced by burning 178 billion pounds of coal. Fact, Brookfield's 2022 environmental ranking was a failing D grade. This is the good part. They go into detail and they specifically call out their management chair and the head of transition investing, Mark Carney, a prominent former central banker, despite being a high-profile advocate for the financial sector's commitments to net zero targets, including acting as co-chair of the G funds, which he founded. Carney oversees investment decisions that starkly contrast with sustainable and transparent practices. Brookfield embodies the definition of greenwashing.
Yep.
Within this context, Mark Carney is central to Brookfield's branding as a responsible green investor. And this is the best statement of it all. Mark Carney has orchestrated a rally of financial sector commitments towards reaching net zero. However, by setting targets without committing to clear emissions reductions or a move away from fossil fuels altogether, GFANZ is largely symbolic. This, in the report, it breaks down all of their energy assets, renewable, upstream, midstream, downstream, and you see them all: power station, compressor station, LNG terminal, pipeline processing. Brookfield is in the business of gas and oil, but Mark Carney is telling us, you and I, that Canada is not in this business, and this is supposedly supposed to be a Canadian company, to which he moved the headquarters from Canada into the US and lied about it. Let's take a look at the average capacity of Brookfield's current electricity generators by fuel type. Look at the top one is coal. Coal, the dirtiest of them all. Brookfield follows a trend among major private equity firms of undercounting their planet-warming emissions and placing polluting assets behind a labyrinth of corporate structures and shell companies. This probably includes the over 48 Bermuda companies that I found online that they use in order to get tax-free money sent back up to Canada by using transfer pricing. And this report gets so good. They talk about ADNOC pipelines. They purchased, Brookfield being they, 50%, well, nearly 50% in that asset. These are 38 gas pipelines operated by the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. They secured that through a $10 billion deal. Its estimated emissions from these pipelines alone total more than 9.5 million metric CO2 per year, the equivalent of burning more than 4.8 metric tons of coal. Again, this is what the pipeline network looks like that they own, at least 47% of. The analysis suggests that they plan to spend at least $150 billion on new oil and gas production over the next decade, despite warnings from the United Nations. Just so you know, this analysis is developed by researchers from Americans for Financial Reform Education Fund, Global Energy Monitor, and the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. These are a nonpartisan, nonprofit coalition of more than 200 civil rights, community-based consumer labor businesses, investors, faith-based and civic groups, along with individual experts. Here's the reality of it. Mark Carney clearly has no problem making millions of dollars while being the head of Brookfield, making his investors millions and billions of dollars. But when it comes to Canadians like you or I, where we have the third largest oil and gas reserves in the world, it's almost a conflict of interest that he would not do that for regular folks like you and I, where we can actually have tax breaks because we would have so much income coming into our country, but he has no problem doing this for Brookfield. Unbelievable. Came across a surreal report.
Yeah, and talking about trade barriers, give me a break. Look at the provincial and territorial trade barriers for oil that we have in place right now. People are so uneducated when it comes to their actual country. Like, I just don't get it. At the top.
Mr. Polyev, it sounds a lot like Justin Trudeau's modest deficit line. Is this Carney just saying that Trudeau's playbook, it wasn't bad, I'm just smarter than him and I can run it better?
No, it's exactly what you said. We have here the repetition, maybe even the plagiarizing of the Justin Trudeau 2015 Liberal promise of 3 modest deficits that were going to, 1, stimulate growth, 2, build infrastructure, and 3, help the middle class. Remember that?
Yeah.
Well, those 3 deficits have turned into 9 deficits. The $25 billion in borrowing has turned into $700 billion of borrowing. And as for growth, it's the worst in the G7. As for investment, we've lost $500 billion investment to the United States.
Yep.
And as for the middle class, well,
that's just one company.
80% of them are paying a higher income tax. 100% of them are paying a higher carbon tax. And almost none of our middle class people can afford homes for the first time in our history. That is how that promise played out the last time Liberals made it. Now, Mark Carney is making exactly the same promises with exactly the same words, exactly the same timelines, exactly the same Liberal strategists writing it, and exactly the same Liberal MPs and ministers who would be expected to implement it. Why would you expect the result to be any different?
You shouldn't.
Anybody who has a Tesla, sell it. Yeah. Sell it immediately and sell it for the lowest dollar that you can.
Don't buy Teslas. And if you have a Tesla, sell your Tesla. If you have neighbors who have Teslas, tell them to sell their Teslas.
Protesting Tesla. This is the new current thing.
Whoa! Is this your Tesla?
Yeah, it is. Are you living in my bushes?
A little bit. You need to sell your Tesla.
I don't think I'm going to do that.
Oh, you have to sell it.
Why would I do that?
Because Elon is a Nazi and he's fascistly taking over the government with Doge. So we need to bankrupt Tesla to stop him. So you need to sell your Tesla.
How would that help anything? Tesla already has my money, and if I sell this, then they'll still have my money. It makes no sense. Have you even thought about the economic logistics of your little protest?
You need to sell it, or else you're directly supporting a known Nazi.
What?
Nazi!
Wait, I'm confused. Are you for or against Nazis?
I'm against Nazis. You're the one that's for them.
Well, it seems like you're for them. Your sign literally has the word Nazi on it. It's not even crossed out. It looks like you're kind of a fan.
Never really thought about that, but you driving a Tesla is directly supporting fascism. Hey, everyone! This guy's supporting a fascist Nazi dictator, Elon.
You think a guy that's trying to take power away from the government is a fascist dictator?
Yeah.
Bro, have you thought about that?
And everywhere you drive, you are spreading the Naziest version of fascism. Sell your Tesla.
So, let me get this straight. Your protest includes trespassing on my property, intimidating me with demands for what you want, and if I don't meet those demands, there will be consequences?
Yes, exactly. To stop fascism. That's why you have to sell it.
So then once I sell the Tesla, I should join you and start protesting against the person who now owns the Tesla. Is that correct?
That would be good.
Is the dye poisoning you? Like, is your blue-haired brain even working?
Look into my eyes. Of course my brain is working.
Wait, is that a wig?
No.
Dude, you're wearing a wig. That's so gay. That's so creepy.
Sell your Tesla, jerk. You know what? If you keep driving the vehicle of your choice, I will find you wherever you go and vandalize your precious little Cybertruck.
It's got cameras all over it, dipshit. You'll be recorded.
Do all of them have cameras?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that. Shit. I'm probably going to be in some trouble.
Probably.
You're really just going to drive a car made by a Nazi? You're okay with that?
Ma'am, is that your Jetta over there?
Yeah. I don't drive cars made by Nazis.
Did you know that the Volkswagen company was actually started by Nazis in Germany?
That doesn't feel relevant here.
Have a good day, sir.
It's almost like this sign doesn't work.
Oh, and don't menstruate in my driveway.
Hey, where are you going? I'm still talking to you.
I'm meeting my wife at the Tesla dealership. We're getting her a new model.
All right.
back in 1995, and we quote, "I have a foreboding of an America in my children's or grandchildren's time when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledgeably question those in authority, when, clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide almost without noticing back into superstition and darkness. The dumbing down of America is most evident in the slow decay of substantive content in the enormously influential media. The 30-second sound bites now down to 10 seconds or less. Lowest common denominator programming, credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition, but especially a kind of celebration of ignorance. Roll that around for a while. Back in 1995, and
that seems like what's going on now. All right. I'm wearing clothes under my bathrobe. It's just, I got a little chilly. I had my windows up in my office overnight. And here we go. Climate. The movie, The Cold Truth, Martin Durkin.
People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
How dare you? She was groomed. I feel bad for her. She was a child.
This is the story of how an eccentric environmental scare grew into a powerful global industry.
It's a wonderful business opportunity, okay? You want climate, we'll give you climate.
There's a huge amount of money involved, and this is a huge, big money scam.
There are not just now billions, but there are trillions of dollars at stake.
It's a story of self-interest and big government funding.
People like me, our careers depend on funding of climate research. This is what I've been doing just about my whole career. This is what the other climate researchers are doing with their whole career. They don't want this to end.
If CO2 isn't having the huge negative impacts that we claimed it was having originally, how are we going to stay in business?
A lot of people's livelihoods depend on it. They're not going to give that up.
This is a story of the corruption of science.
There's no such thing as a climate emergency happening on this planet now. There's no evidence of one.
The climate alarm is nonsense. You know, it's a hoax. I've never liked hoax. I think scam is a better word, but I'm willing to live with hoax.
It's a story about the bullying and intimidation of anyone who dares to challenge the climate alarm.
To speak up against or about climate change in any sort of skeptical way was essentially career suicide.
Activists are even calling for any skepticism to be criminalized.
It's the story of an assault on individual freedom.
It's a wonderful way to increase government power. If there's an existential threat out there that's worldwide, well, you need a powerful worldwide government, to cope with it.
We see all these kind of authoritarian measures being adopted in the name of saving the planet.
You've suddenly got the population under control all over the world.
We called it industrial progress. Since the Industrial Revolution, the development of free market capitalist mass production has made ever more goods ever more affordable to ever larger numbers of people. Mass production marched hand in hand with mass consumption. In the modern age, ordinary people enjoy a level of prosperity never before achieved in human history. But all the while, we're told we were destroying the planet. Computers have calculated what is in store for us as we produce and consume ever more. The weather will get worse. the planet will boil, we greedy humans must accept limits on our lifestyle, consume less, travel less. Those who deny the climate crisis are not just wrong, they're dangerous, spreading the poison of doubt among a gullible population. These deniers should be shunned and shamed and censored. For these climate deniers are flat earthers. They are anti-science. Teaching at New York University is one of these climate deniers. Professor Stephen Koonin is one of America's leading physicists. He was a science advisor to President Obama and both vice president and provost of Caltech, one of the most prestigious scientific institutes in the world.
I teach climate science to my students at NYU, and I always tell them, check the data or the papers yourself. And they all come out of that course with their eyes wide open.
Professor Koonin's best-selling book, Unsettled, argues that mainstream scientific studies, accepted by official agencies, do not support the notion that there is any kind of climate crisis at all.
Of course, I've been called a denier. And my response is, tell me what I'm denying, because I'm quoting from you directly from the official UN scientific reports.
Dick Lindzen also dismisses the claims of climate alarmists. He's one of the world's leading meteorologists, was professor of meteorology at both Harvard University and MIT, and has served on the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC.
Even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, if you go to their section of Working One, Group 1, which is the science, they don't support any of these claims. And I assure you, having served on it, it's biased, but you couldn't get any real scientists to agree some of the nonsense that's being promoted.
Will Happer is also a denier and is another of America's leading physicists. He has been science advisor to 3 presidents and professor of physics at both Columbia and Princeton University.
There's this mischievous idea that's promoted that scientific truth is determined by consensus. In real science, there are always arguments. No science is ever settled. It just is absurd when people say the science of climate is settled. It's not. There's no such thing as settled science, especially climate.
Dr. John Clauser is one of the most respected scientists in the world. In
Literal
2022,
experts.
he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics.
The science that's being done is appallingly bad, in my opinion. There are a large number of scientists who are in violent disagreement.
I hope that Stephen Guilbeault gets investigated for this. There has to be some kind of legal ramifications for blatantly exploiting Canadians from our taxpayers' money, billions of friggin' dollars into this this climate change, climate scam, and this carbon tax scam. How was he able to get away with it for so long when so many experts like this were screaming from the rooftops, giving actual scientific data and saying that they're climate deniers? And there's so much arson and man-made disasters that are being blamed on climate, and it's absolutely nonsensical to me.
They refer to themselves as skeptics. Since I am no longer worried about losing funding or a job, whatever, I call myself a climate change denier.
These very eminent and respected scientists, and others like them, are not flat earthers. They do not deny science. So what's the evidence that has caused them to
I'll
dismiss
allow
the
that,
climate alarm?
even though the Earth is projected on a flat plane of inertia, although this is an electromagnetic reality that's contained. And it's also some kind of a computer game, some kind of a simulation. Coding. Using things like light and sonar and radar as a way to express itself. Anyway, I'll allow it.
As nonsense.
The science is there.
We
We
are
don't have
told
to
that
agree
current temperatures are unprecedented and dangerously high. It's possible to check if this is true because we have evidence of Earth's climate history dating back hundreds, thousands, even millions of years. The desert of Judea by the Dead Sea. Professor Nir Shavi from the Raqqa Institute of Physics has come here looking for clues. Thousands of years ago, this place was underwater, and etched into the rocks are lines which, if you know how to read them, tell the story of Earth's climate history.
And here's the climate. We're at the lake bed of what used to be Lake Lisan. It's a lake that existed until the end of the last ice age. Back then, the lake level was maybe 100 meters above where we're located. When we want to reconstruct climates of the past, we have to look for evidence, for clues. And when the lake existed, it had deposits. And by looking at these layers here, we can actually reconstruct how the climate has changed.
Warmer water means more life, the accumulation of more shells and bones from sea creatures, and other changes that are reflected in the ancient layers of the lake bed. The lines act as a kind of thermometer, and this is just one way geologists can reconstruct past climate.
In other places, we can go to stalagmite caves and see the annual rings that you have in the stalagmites, or we can drill cores from the bottom of the ocean and then look at layers there, or many other places. But here, I think this is one of the nicest places because you can actually see how the climate has changed.
So when we look back in time, what do we find? For 200 million years, dinosaurs roamed the Earth. An Earth marked by fertile, dense forests, teeming with life. And at no time during those 200 million years were temperatures as cold as they are today.
If you go back, let's say, 200 million years, it was maybe 13 degrees warmer than it is now. So on the geological perspective, this is not at all unprecedented.
For the last 500 million years, temperatures have varied greatly. But for almost all that time, the Earth was much, much warmer than today. Compared to the last 500 million years, the Earth right now is exceptionally cold. In fact, there are very few times when it's been this cold.
We're relatively cold. Maybe not quite the coldest it's been in 500 million years, but pretty close to it.
We are in a remarkably cool period if we look over the last 550 million years. In fact, only one other time period in that last 550 million years was the temperature as cool as it is now.
The mammals who now inhabit the Earth began to evolve around 60 million years ago, when the world was much warmer than today.
If we just look at the last 65 million years, so this is after the dinosaurs go extinct, mammals really start to take over, and our evolutionary ancestors start to live on the land. Any time period within the last 65 million years was warmer than it is essentially today.
The Earth's mammals, humans included, appear to thrive when it's warm, warmer than it is now.
There's no doubt that warm is better than cold in geological history. We are a tropical species. A human being in the shade, naked, dies at 20 C from hypothermia. We evolved on the equator in Africa, and the only reason we were able to get out of there eventually was fire, shelter, and clothing.
Over the last 50 million years, temperatures steadily declined, plunging the Earth into what geologists call the late Cenozoic Ice Age. We are still in that ice age.
The reason there's all that ice on the poles is because we're in an ice age. Everybody knows that who knows anything about the history of the Earth. This is an ice age. We're at the tail end of a 50 million year cooling period, and they're saying it's too hot.
If we zoom in on the past few million years, we see temperatures sinking, and as they do, fluctuating between extremely cold periods and slightly milder periods. The extremely cold periods are called glacial maxima, when the planet is mostly covered in ice. And the slightly less cold are called glacial minima, when there's just ice at the poles. For the past 10,000 years, fortunately, we've been in a slightly less cold glacial minimum, known as the Holocene. With milder weather, humans began to emerge from their caves, and several thousand years ago, we see the rise of the first great civilizations, in a blissful period which, according to many studies, was considerably warmer than today. This is known as the Holocene climate optimum.
It was called an optimum because people thought that warmer was better.
Since then, temperatures have declined and begun to fluctuate. In Roman times, there was a blissfully warm period, followed by a brutal cold period in the Dark Ages. Then came the balmy medieval warm period, according to many studies, as warm or warmer than today, followed by an especially cold period known as the Little Ice Age, possibly the coldest in the last 10,000 years. And here it is, the Roman warm period, the cold Dark Age, the medieval warm period, and then the very cold Little Ice Age, from which, for the past 300 years or so, we've been recovering. The longest instrumental record of temperature in the world comes from central England, and this is what it shows. Since the worst of the Little Ice Age, from 1650, the temperature has risen, gently, by little more than 1 degree Celsius.
The central England record of temperature is a world treasure. You know, it's the longest continuous record that we have, and it's certainly not a very alarming record. It began in the depths of the Little Ice Age, and so you can see the slight warming that followed the Little Ice Age. And there's certainly nothing very alarming that's happening today at the very end of the record. Most of the warming that we're observing today is the recovery from the Little Ice Age, whatever caused that.
Well, you know, we're talking over the entire industrial period of about 1 degree centigrade.
To put this 1 degree in perspective, let's look at New York Central Park. Records show that there has been no overall change in temperature here since 1940. But from one year to the next, the average temperature can vary by 3 degrees Celsius, without many New Yorkers even noticing.
Surface temperature because of overdevelopment and electricity, smog, pollution that's generated because of that.
In fact, between the warmest year in the 1960s and the coolest in 2000, there's a difference of 5 degrees Celsius.
The average temperature on this day in this year might be 5 degrees different from the average temperature a year ago or 2 years.
You know, when I hear people pontificating about 1.5 degrees leading to the end of civilization, I think, what have they been smoking? You know, are you crazy? All right. So.
According to thermometer readings since 1880, there's been a very mild increase in temperature. Only by stretching the y-axis on this graph is the increase noticeable. This is the rising line used by official agencies as proof of global warming. But is it accurate? Professor Ross McKittrick is an expert in statistical analysis at Guelph University. He noticed something odd about modern thermometer records. Thermometers, even in the same region, give out very different readings, depending on where they're located.
I was interested in the question of how do you explain the spatial pattern of warming? So some places warm a lot, some places don't warm much. And it turns out it's highly correlated with the spatial pattern of economic activity.
Where there are more people and there is more human activity, there's more heat. This is known as the urban heat island effect.
Urban heat island effect is essentially London, right? You pick London. With buildings, with a lot of activities, tends to be a few degrees. I mean, we're talking now Celsius, right? Even 4 or 5 degrees Celsius warmer than outskirts. This is a phenomenon of urbanization. These days, the obvious effect is actually concrete retaining heat.
This can be illustrated with a satellite heat map of Paris. The center of Paris can be as much as 5 degrees Celsius warmer than the surrounding countryside.
Paris, London, Beijing, Shanghai, you name it, New Delhi, all of them absolutely demonstrated the effects.
So how has this affected the official temperature record? In the early part of the 20th century, it was normal to erect weather thermometers just outside towns, close enough to check every day, but away from the heat of urban life. But over the 20th century, those towns have expanded. Suburbs have spread. There are more roads, more cars. Thermometers which were once outside towns are now surrounded by shopping malls, offices, factories, and houses.
These towns and all the locations where thermometers are located, on average, they've all grown in population, let's say since 1880. You've got buildings growing up around the thermometers. You've got parking lots. So you've got all of these non-climate influences, which are affecting the temperatures, which raises questions about the quality of thermometer data for monitoring global warming.
To correct for this corruption of the data, an obvious solution is to use only records from rural weather stations, which have been less affected by urban development. This has now been done by a team led by Dr. Willie Soon.
We combine all the best rural station, anything that we can correct for, we correct for, and we show if you just don't use this data set and use only rural, you get a very different kind of picture.
According to rural temperature records, temperatures rose from the 1880s but peaked in the 1940s. Then there was a marked cooling until the 1970s. After that, temperatures recover, but are still today barely higher than they were in the 1940s.
What we see is that basically you have a warming from the 1850s or so to 1930s and 40s and started to warm and then cool in a substantial way to the 70s, about 76 or so. Instead of a long-term systematic warming trend, it has a variability, multi-decadal, like every 50, 60 years or so, kind of a variation.
It's not just rural thermometers that show little warming. Merchant ships and other naval vessels have been measuring the temperature of the sea since the 19th century. In red, we see the land temperature record since the 1860s, which has been inflated by urban thermometers. But in blue is the ocean temperature record. From around 1900, the two begin to diverge. Ocean records show far less warming in the 20th century, and the pattern more closely resembles the rural temperature record.
Sea is not supposed to be quote-unquote contaminated by urban heat island effect. Am I right? Yes? So when we compare the two records, within the range of uncertainty, this behavior actually fits.
Scientists have also studied temperature change by looking at tree rings, which again shows very little warming. There's a gentle rise till the mid-20th century, a cooling to the 1970s, followed by a mild recovery. Once again, it shows temperatures today are barely different to those of the 1930s and 40s, and the pattern closely resembles rural temperatures. Satellites, too, seem to be telling a different story. Our ability to measure global temperature accurately took a leap forward when satellites began to orbit the Earth. One of the scientists who pioneered the use of satellites to measure temperature is Dr. Roy Spencer, who in the 1980s was senior scientist for climate at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center.
We were discussing over lunch, isn't there some way we can use satellites to monitor global temperatures? Because, as you know, the temperature network of thermometers is pretty skimpy around the world, so it's kind of hard to get a global temperature.
Dr. Spencer's development of weather satellites was revolutionary. He and his colleague, Professor John Christie, have been awarded NASA's Medal for Exceptional Scientific Achievement.
Our satellite data begins in January of 1979. That's when we have complete global coverage, and we have it right up to the present.
There was one critical question about temperature that satellites were singularly well equipped to answer.
Has there been a spurious warming that has crept into the global temperature record over land that's just a result of an increase in population? And that's something that we've been analyzing and working a lot on lately, and we're finding that, especially in urban areas, it's large. I mean, since 1880, most of the warming, it looks like, is due to the urban heat island effect.
We're lucky to have a few independent scientists like John Christie and Roy Spencer with their satellite measurements of temperature. You know, before they started releasing this, ground-based temperature records were going wild. They were going up, you know, like crazy with no bounds. But now they have to contend with the fact that there's this independent and probably better way of measuring the whole globe's temperature, which is not alarming at all.
Evidence from multiple sources now agree that the official global temperature record, as used by world governments and reported in the world's media, is showing far too much warming over the last 120 years, artificially inflated by urbanization.
You look at the weather balloon record, the satellite record, the rural record, the ocean record doesn't warm nearly as much as land. All of these indications show that the big warming pulse in the record is the Northern Hemisphere land record. And that's also where most of this data contamination is happening.
But of the mild warming that has taken place in the last 300 to 400 years, can any of it be attributed to human emissions of CO2? Professor Henrik Svensmark is visiting the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and taking a stroll in the evolution garden, dedicated to preserving the oldest surviving plant species on Earth. These plants aren't just pleasing on the eye. They can also tell us about levels of CO2 in the atmosphere in Earth's geological past.
What we have here is a ginkgo tree, and it's actually a living fossil in the sense that this type of tree first appeared about 270 million years ago. On the underside of the leaf, there are what we call stomata, the cells where they can uptake CO2. So they're actually measuring how much CO2 is in the air, and then they adjust the number of these stomata to how much CO2 there is. And by looking at fossils and measuring how many there are at a different time, it says something about what was the level of CO2 back in time.
So when we look back in time, what do we find? Over almost all of the last 500 million years, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere has been far, far higher than it is now. Even with modern industry's contribution to CO2 levels, by geological standards, the level of atmospheric CO2 today is close to being as low as it has ever been.
At present, we have about 400 parts per million. 50 million years ago, it might have been 2,000 parts per million. So a much, much higher concentration of CO2.
I think current estimates of global CO2 is 423 or so parts per million today. If we look through the Phanerozoic, the last 550 million years, we would see CO2 on the order of 7,000 parts per million.
CO2 is plant food, and the result of much higher levels of atmospheric CO2 in the past was a much, much greener world.
Periods of elevated CO2 tend to be time periods of a huge biodiversity on the planet. In fact, we're in a CO2 famine if we look over the last 550 million years.
At the depths of the most recent glacial maximum, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere sank so low, all life on Earth came close to extinction.
They say CO2 is higher than it's been for 100,000 years, but what they don't tell you in that period they're talking about is that CO2 sank so low that all life on Earth nearly died.
20,000 years ago, CO2 is at the lowest level it has ever been in the history of the Earth, 180 parts per million. If it had gone down another 30 parts per million, we'd all be dead.
There is a low point of CO2 where photosynthesis becomes so inefficient that plant life would die. Then everything else starts to perish after that.
During the last glacial maximum, there's good evidence that in many parts of the world there was plant starvation from not enough CO2. So we should be very grateful that CO2 levels are beginning to go back up. We're still far from the historical norms, which would be several thousand parts per million. There's not enough fossil fuel to get there, but at least we're making a start.
But has the small recent increase in CO2 affected the temperature? We would now show you a picture of CO2, but we can't because it's invisible. CO2 makes up a tiny fraction of the gases in the atmosphere, just 0.04%. It is just one of 25 different greenhouse gases, which, taken as a whole, form only one part of Earth's complex climate system. So what evidence is there that this trace gas is having any noticeable impact on the climate? If it were true that higher levels of CO2 caused higher temperatures, we should be able to see that in Earth's climate history. Here, scientists are drilling into ancient ice cores. These cores tell us both about past temperatures and CO2 levels. Scientists have indeed found a link between temperature and CO2. The trouble is, it's the wrong way round.
So it's true over the last few million years of the ice age that we're in now that CO2 and temperature are correlated, but if CO2 is the driver, it has to change first, and the temperature has to change second.
In fact, when you start to look at the data very specifically, you see the exact reverse. Temperature starts to rise first, and then on the order of a century to a few centuries later, we start to see a rise in CO2.
It's long been known that the temperature actually moves first. So temperature goes up, CO2 goes up after that. Temperature goes down, CO2 goes down.
Ice ages start when carbon dioxide is at its maximum, and ice ages end when carbon dioxide is at its minimum, which is the exact opposite of what would occur if carbon dioxide was controlling the temperature.
The question of whether CO2 drives the climate is easily resolved. You can look back in time over hundreds of millions of years. CO2 levels have changed radically many times. Did this cause temperature change? No, absolutely not. CO2 has never driven temperature changes in the past, never.
Nor is it clear in recent times that CO2 is having any effect on temperature. Here we see industrial output of CO2 since 1750. From the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century, there was only a slight increase. It's not until the 1940s that industrial production of CO2 begins to take off. But this doesn't match the temperature record. According to rural thermometers, most of the warming in the past 200 years occurred before the 1940s and have barely changed since then.
One of the embarrassments that IPCC doesn't like to talk about was that the 1930s, when human influences were much smaller, were particularly warm.
That's the puzzle, that the first early part where we have such a sharp warming from the 1900s to 1930s and 1940s, CO2 could never cause that temperature rise.
But the 1930s and early 40s were so hot is puzzling. More puzzling still is what happened next.
By the end of World War II, CO2 was really going up, and yet the temperature was going down.
From 40 to 70,
the World War II and the atomic bombs as well.
The CO2 continued to rise. This thing started to cool.
Oh, they didn't emit carbon.
What happened?
Oh, okay.
Journalists were writing about the coming ice age. It was on the cover of Time magazine.
1970s, the new ice age was the big story.
And how about since the 1970s? According to computer climate models, over the past half-century, rising CO2 should have led to this increase in temperature. But according to multiple satellite and balloon measurements, what actually happened was this.
Well, what we found from the satellite data is that the global atmosphere is not warming up as fast as the climate models say it should be. There's a couple dozen climate models now that have been worked on for decades. You know, billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars have been invested in these climate modeling efforts. And we find that generally speaking, virtually all of the climate models produce too much warming over this period since 1979 up to the present. Now, even if we say the surface thermometers are correct, they still don't produce as much warming as most of the climate models say there should have been, let's say, in the last 50 years.
The models, individually and even collectively, when you average over all of them in so-called ensembles, they don't get it right.
You can already see that the main support of the climate alarm movement, which are these enormous computer models, they're clearly wrong. They don't agree with what we observe. You know, they're all running much too hot. They don't get the geographical distribution of temperatures anywhere close. They don't get El Nino, La Nina cycles. They're just nonsense.
All climate models are based on the assumption that CO2 drives temperature change. But actual observations and historical evidence clearly suggest that it doesn't.
Yes, I assert that there is no connection whatsoever between CO2 and climate change. That's all a crock of crap, in my opinion.
There is no truth to the idea that the Earth is warmer now than it has been in the past. It's a lie. There is no truth that CO2 is higher than it should be. That is a lie.
Earth's climate has changed many times over the course of its long history and will continue to change without any help from us.
Climate always changes, you know. Who denies climate change? It's always changing.
if CO2 doesn't drive climate change, what does? In Earth's atmosphere, there are powerful forces at work, and perhaps the most powerful of all are clouds.
CO2 is quite unimportant in controlling the Earth's climate. What is important is clouds. Clouds don't absorb any energy at all. They simply reflect all of the sunlight back out into space. Big, bright, white clouds. If you look at the Earth, you see lots and lots of them, and they vary dramatically from one day to the next. That is hundreds of times more powerful than the trivial effects of CO2.
But what controls the number and density of clouds on Earth? Professor Henrik Svensmark from the Danish National Space Institute is in Jerusalem with the astrophysicist Nir Shaviv. Together, they've been exploring cloud variation and its effect on climate. And strangely, they've found a link between clouds and exploding supernovae far off in our galaxy.
When we have big stars, they don't live very long. Relatively only maybe a few million years, up to 40 million years. But they end their life in a huge explosion, which we call the supernova.
An exploding supernova sends out vast quantities of debris, tiny charged subatomic particles known as cosmic rays, traveling almost at the speed of light. And as they hit Earth, they develop into seeds which attract water vapor and form clouds. Professor Shaviv noticed that the amount of cloud cover on Earth is related to our journey round the Milky Way. As our solar system orbits the galaxy over millions of years,
That doesn't happen.
it passes through the galaxy's spiral arms.
Skip ahead of this.
Is that using geology, you can reconstruct the climate on Earth.
Yes, use geology, please. Thank you. And look into carbon-14, by the way, and this radioactive isotope with 6 protons, 6 electrons and 8 protons, I believe it is. It's unstable. It has like the longest shelf life, whatever you want to call it, decay, and atomic bombs.
Earth over the past billion years, and you can reconstruct our galactic journey, and both tell the same story.
But what about temperature change on shorter timescales? The sun, our source of heat and light, a seething mass of gigantic magnetic storms, which vary in strength and number over time, and which affect Earth.
But it is smaller and more local and within the firmament.
Directly and indirectly.
It is
When
most
this is
definitely
very
not 93 million miles away.
active, the sun sends giant gusts of solar wind through the solar system. The solar wind warms us indirectly by acting as a barrier, limiting the number of cloud-forming cosmic rays reaching Earth.
Cosmic rays. They're talking about the gases within the ether, and how there's a reaction whenever there's more particles of varying sorts that are exposed into the environment, and depending on things like temperature, pressure, and density, this impacts how this reality is perceived. And then I talk about like the circular route that the luminaries take within the sky, but again, localized, or local rather, closer to us within the firmament. And so what they're talking about the Milky Way and stuff like that, again, it's how that environment is reacting to what's being exposed within its environment, including light. And I've showed you how even with magnets, like light can bend in vacuums. It's very interesting. And so I believe that's the similar effect with the sun as it moves, and the moon, some kind of sonoluminescence and cymatics at play, right? And so light and sound at play, electricity versus magnetism, centripetal versus centrifugal forces.
So from the sun, we have the solar wind. It carries the sun's magnetic.
We have like the noble gases too, and how they can be luminescent based on their exposure, based on the exposure in their environment.
Field out to a large distance, and it works like a shield against cosmic rays.
When the sun is more active, you have a stronger solar wind, You have less cosmic rays reaching the inner solar system and reaching the atmosphere. And the clouds, which are then formed, are less white. They reflect less of the sunlight, which means that it's going to be warmer here on Earth.
Yeah, there's a lot of like geoengineering, weather modification that needs to stop because that's also blocking the sun's rays from reaching us and from the heat to rise, which is why we're also experiencing higher surface temperatures.
Here is a proxy reconstruction of ocean temperatures over thousands of years. And here is one of solar activity over the same period. What is causing the ocean temperature to change is clearly variations in solar activity.
Because IPCC is determined to go on a narrative that only CO2 can drive the climate system, they turn off the sun essentially, right? Because the sun is just a background thing for them, that it doesn't do anything.
Astrophysicist Willie Soon decided to look again at the rural temperature record for the past 150 years. Then he looked at a record of changes in solar activity over the same period. To Dr. Soon, it was obvious that it was the sun, not CO2, that was driving temperature.
As of 2023, IPCC says is that the sun have absolutely zero chance to explain the changes of the climate system on a broad scale, let's say global warming or northern hemisphere. We say no. We can easily demonstrate the sun can explain all of it. There's zero for the CO2, 100% for the sun. How's that?
Why are these and other studies never reported in the mainstream media? And if climate change is natural, what are we to make of the alleged terrifying increase in extreme weather events? Of the heat waves and hurricanes, of forest fires, droughts, and the rest?
My first instinct as a scientist and what I teach my students is, well, let's look at the data. And when you do that, you discover, as you can read in the IPCC reports themselves, that it's pretty hard to find trends in extreme events, much less attribute them to human influences.
You've now had decades of putting the idea in people's heads.
So again, I talk about weather modification, geoengineering, and how I've even shared pilot accounts admitting that they're spreading toxins, chemicals in the air that are harmful to the soil, to the environment, obviously to humans, to any living organism. And they've been doing it for decades, if not longer. And there's just too much proof now, finally, because of people like me who have been speaking out on this for years and being called crazy. We just keep on sharing proof, scientific data, corporate data, financial transactions, like websites, like literally that are like funded by the Canadian government and the American government working together, and their excuses are ridiculous. I've shared that, but also talking about they're doing it to create rain or snow, depending on the season, and they're knowingly doing it, knowing that it causes harm to living organisms, and they don't care. Unethical people, godless people, in my humble opinion. I mean that in as respectful of a way as I can. And I just can't believe people actually get away with doing this. When people receive blessings, you're supposed to give blessings to others. Like that's, God's plan, in my humble opinion. And people are tempted by what we're calling the devil or Satan, like Lucifer too. But again, that's a misrepresentation of Lucifer, which is a representation of Venus, the luminary in the sky, and seen as a morning star or an evening star, depending on the season, because sometimes it precedes the sun, sometimes it proceeds. And I've shared that too. Just take a look at a farmer's almanac, and this is predictable every single day of every single year. And a light bringer. And so, not what we're calling but anyways, we are tempted on Earth, and people that are more ethical and more moral. I'm not saying I'm a perfect person. I'm not at all. But to try to be a good person and give to others and blessings, and people are not doing that. Where's it going with that? Yeah, so people just need to stop doing that.
That any time the weather is bad,
sued and
it's
jailed.
Climate change and greenhouse gases. So I think people at this point can't help themselves.
Those are crimes against humanity.
Immediately everybody's thinking, oh, what have we done to the weather?
If somebody says in the news this is the warmest day since 1980 or something, well, you can look up the temperature records and see for yourself whether it was in fact warmer in the 1930s, as it often is.
US temperature records are the best in the world. And here is the official US government record of heat waves in the US over the past century. It shows very clearly that the 1930s were far more prone to heat waves than we are today. Not only were there more heat waves in the 1930s, the heat waves then were much hotter than those of today. Likewise, official figures show that the number of hot days in the US has markedly declined.
The United States was much hotter in the 1930s. North Dakota reached 121 degrees. South Dakota was 120 degrees. Wisconsin was 114 degrees. These sort of temperatures are just completely out of range of anything people experience now.
A common mistake is to suppose that higher average temperature will mean more hot weather. But this isn't true. Here again is the Central England temperature record, the longest instrumental temperature record in the world. Summer temperatures over the past 300 to 400 years, since the end of the Little Ice Age, have barely changed at all. It is winter temperatures that have been slightly rising. The Earth's climate has not been getting hotter, it's been getting milder.
That's certainly being observed all over the world. If you look at temperature records, high temperatures are almost unchanged. But cold temperatures at night or during the winter are going up a little bit. Not very much, but you can measure it.
When the average goes up, it's really more due to the coldest temperatures getting warmer. So the temperatures getting milder rather than getting hotter.
What about the increasing number of wildfires we're often told about?
If you look at the actual number of forest fires from satellite observations, the actual number's going down.
Here is an estimate of global wildfires since 1900. It shows a clear decline. And here is a record of areas affected by wildfires in the US. It shows that wildfires were far, far worse in the 1930s.
From 1930s and 1920s, when you have data, the thing was huge. 5 to 10 times bigger than the current level.
How about hurricanes? The US has by far the best record of hurricane activity in the world. Over the past 120 years, there is no overall change. In fact, the trend is slightly down.
When you look at the data for hurricanes, technically tropical cyclones, you see that there is no long-term trend.
How about the rest of the world? Here is a chart of global hurricane activity over the past 40 years.
Hurricanes have been around forever. You know, we've got good proxy records of hurricanes, and there's been no change in their frequency. Even the IPCC admits that.
How about melting ice caps and drought? Here's a satellite record of temperature in Antarctica since the late 1970s. It shows no increase whatsoever. And here is a record of global drought since 1950. There is no observable increase at all. Polar bears are meant to be going extinct, but studies suggest their numbers are growing. The Great Barrier Reef, too, has recently reached record levels.
There's no such thing as a climate emergency happening on this planet now. There's no evidence of one.
Yeah, the extreme weather event story is just absurd. There's no basis to it at all. It's just based on propaganda. The actual data shows the opposite.
I've shown you the official data, the official science. Tell me what I'm denying.
The climate alarm is nonsense. You know, it's a hoax. I've never liked hoax. I think scam is a better word, but I'm willing to live with hoax.
But why are we told again and again that man-made climate chaos is an undisputed scientific fact, beyond question, beyond doubt? To answer this, we must examine the so-called consensus on climate change.
Thank you very much.
Until the 1980s, global warming was little more than an eccentric scare story put about by radical environmentalists. But then the cause was picked up by an ambitious young senator, Al Gore, who would soon become vice president. $1 billion a year of public money was made available for research into climate change. This quickly rose to $2 billion.
Up to that level.
Academic researchers in various disciplines began to apply for this climate funding.
If you want to qualify for money that's labeled climate, well, you take whatever you're doing and you add a little bit of climate speak to it, and away you go.
You're dealing with the sexual habits of cockroaches, you'll add, and the impact of climate.
So all I have to do is add a little wrinkle to my grant application to explain how, well, I'm worried that climate change will mean the death of all the maple trees. And so right away you qualify for funding.
Academics of every kind lined up for climate funding. Climate became an exciting new area of interest for sociologists, biologists, professors of English literature, lecturers in gender studies, and many more.
And it also served to create a community. I mean, you know, you've become a climate scientist now, even though you know nothing about the physics of climate.
Thousands of papers were published on climate change and prostitution, climate change and beer, climate change and the Black Death, climate change and disability, climate change and video games, and everything else imaginable.
There's an almost comical list of studies out there. Just do a Google search on climate change and everything comes up.
Few of these papers ever questioned whether climate change was actually true.
After you've done the research and you write the paper up, sometimes you'll find there's no effect at all from climate, but you still have to say in your papers, oh yes, climate change is real, and we just need to study this some more.
Since so few of these so-called climate studies challenged the idea of climate change, it was declared that there was a scientific consensus. Climate change must be true. Climate also became a new focus for government-funded research bodies.
Scientific research in the United States tends to be dominantly funded by government grants. And so whatever government grants are offered sort of determine much of the science being done.
It was during the Cold War that many government research bodies were set up. But the end of the Cold War and pressure on government spending has left many of them struggling to justify their continued funding.
United States Congress only funds problems, okay? Research into problems, whether it's money that goes to NASA or NOAA or National Science Foundation or Department of Energy or any other alphabet soup, organization.
It's always been a problem to support your research or your existence or raison d'etre. And so climate was a godsend.
If Congress is willing to pay you to find evidence of global warming, by golly, as a scientist, we're going to go find evidence of it because that's what we're being paid to do. And guess what? If you don't find evidence or say the evidence suggests it's not a problem, your funding ends. This totally corrupts the way we look at the science.
Who was the famous gangster asked, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Well, because that's where the money is."
The climate alarm brought funds, and the bigger the supposed threat, the more funds seemed to flow. The publicly funded science establishment now had a direct financial interest in playing up the alarm.
So there's a huge incentive to over-exaggerate or to speak in hyperbole, even if the data doesn't support exactly what you're saying, because that's what brings the funds. I was in that boat. I was someone that was defending climate change as a grad student quite a bit, because the truth is I didn't give it too much thought, but I thought, well, it's getting a ton of attention. It brings a ton of money into the earth sciences. Even if I don't buy all the hyperbole, what's the problem?
By the late 1990s, what had started as an environmental scare story was gaining momentum. Western governments and their senior civil servants were more than willing to address the climate problem. Green taxes were levied, green regulation expanded, and this in turn generated more climate-related jobs and activity.
Take the banking sector, for instance. You say to a banker, we want you to file reports with the the Regulatory Commission on how climate change is going to affect your bank. Well, a banker doesn't know anything about this subject, so then they have to commission studies from academics. And of course, the academics are happy to come and tell them, well, it's going to be terrible for your bank. It's going to cause all kinds of problems, and you need to give us money to research this.
Green subsidies and regulation meant there was now money to be made in climate. Renewables firms sprouted. Consultancy firms offered advice on what they called sustainability and climate compliance.
It's a wonderful business opportunity, okay? You want climate, we'll give you climate.
The renewables industry alone now turns over $1 trillion a year, and that's expected to double in the next few years.
What used to be a cottage industry is now blossomed to become a major part of the world economy.
The growth of this climate industry has seen an explosion of highly paid green jobs. Chief sustainability officers, carbon offset advisors, ESG consultants, climate compliance lawyers, and countless others.
Students started to come into our departments as earth science departments with a focus on climate. That never happened before. But they started to look at their career prospects, and they were smart, and they were looking at who's hiring. And the fact of the matter is that everything in the hiring pool had climate somewhere attached to the name.
I started a few years ago seeing programs like a master's degree in climate finance. And I just went, what on earth is climate? I understand what a master's degree in finance is. Well, now you need a university that's going to teach this program. You need professors of climate finance.
Every single school or university or business will have a climate officer or climate officers and a climate program. And you look at any of these institutions or businesses, you will find they all are signed up to it, and anyone who hasn't signed up will come under pressure.
At the last gathering of the publicly funded UN's IPCC, 70,000 delegates flew in from around the world. Government bureaucrats, green NGOs, consultants, environmental journalists, heads of renewables companies. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Many hundreds of thousands of jobs worldwide now depend on the climate crisis.
You start building this enormous population whose job is to manage the crisis, and also explicitly to make sure that people are alarmed about the crisis, because this whole industry depends on the existence of the crisis.
But therein lies the one great threat to this multi-trillion-dollar industry. All the jobs, all of the funding are totally dependent on there being a climate crisis.
If CO2 isn't having the huge negative impacts that we claimed it was having originally, how are we going to stay in business? How do we justify our existence if climate change isn't this existential threat that we claimed it was over the last 4 decades or so?
People like me, our careers depend on funding of climate research. This is what I've been doing just about my whole career. This is what the other climate researchers are doing with their whole career. They don't want this to end.
If NASA said global warming's not a problem, where does their funding disappears, right? So they can't say that. I mean, you've got the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. If they said the climate isn't changing, they'd have no reason to exist.
The IPCC has a self-preservation instinct to show that climate change is an existential threat. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to be collecting the money and doing the work in the first place.
There are not just now billions, but there are trillions of dollars at stake.
There's a huge amount of money involved. This is a huge, big money scam. A lot of people's livelihoods depend on it. They're not going to give that up.
If suddenly the notion becomes apparent that this is not such a problem, you're going to see that as an existential threat.
Scientists who studied the natural causes of climate change began to be viewed with suspicion, as 2 Harvard astrophysicists discovered.
How much does the sun change, and how does it change, and why does it change? And then we didn't even want to get into the temperature record and the climate thing. Immediately they will come after it, because when we started to estimate that the sun changed by quite significantly in terms of climatic sense, immediately the attack is there because it's not following the narrative, because they need the CO2 to be the only one, the only dominant player.
When you try to say, well, gee, we're just looking for the background of natural variability, the response would be, we can't have natural changes as an effect.
I'm going to keep on playing it, but I want to break it up a little bit because this could be a little bit monotone. And this is from Jimmy Dore, just to show like the ridiculousness. And Mark Carney and his wife and family and elitist friends have gone to these COPs for a very long time. He went to the COP 26, like I mentioned in yesterday's video. But
Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, Providence, Rhode Island, San Jose, Toledo, and Bakersfield. Go to jimmygore.com for a
listen to this.
They're having a climate summit, and they literally cut down all this forest to build a highway for it. You think I'm kidding?
No.
A new 4-lane highway cutting through tens of thousands of acres of protected
And it's protected.
Amazon rainforest
They don't
is
care.
being built for the COP30 climate summit in the Brazilian city of Belém.
This is one of the greatest things I've ever seen on the news. I mean, how absurd is it going to get before like everybody stops believing that this is real and not completely one big mafia scam on you? Like that, come on.
I'm sorry. It aims to ease traffic to the city, which will host more than 50,000 people, including world leaders, at the conference in November. So they cut down the Amazon forest so they could ease traffic.
Well, good thing all the things they warned us about the Amazon were a lie, and there's actually a lot of it. Thank goodness. The old lies. Otherwise, I'd be terrified that there's no Amazon left, because that's what they told me for my entire life.
My entire life. And now the people,
not true.
The people who are going to a conference to tell me how to save the climate are the ones cutting down the Amazon forest.
I guess it's okay to do that, and you don't have to worry too much. Otherwise, you'd probably go green and Zoom into your climate conference, or maybe handle it in Davos.
The state government touts the highway's sustainable credentials, but some locals and conservationists are outraged at the environmental impact. The Amazon plays a vital role in absorbing carbon for the world and providing biodiversity, and many say this deforestation contradicts the very purpose of the climate summit. You think? I wonder how many of them are taking private jets to this climate summit?
Well, remember what the great Bill Gates said, trees are not the answer.
That's right.
Remember how there wasn't enough trees, and then they're like, no, just having a lot of trees isn't going to do it.
No.
So guess what? Because having a lot of trees, I'm sure does do it. It's
I'm
going
sure
to
it
come
does.
down because we're going to have a crisis that you're going to need to obey us to get through. You see what I'm saying? They love causing climate. They love causing it.
Along the partially built road, lush rainforest towers on either side, a reminder of what was once there. Logs are piled high in the cleared land, which stretches more than 8 miles through the rainforest into Belém. You got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. There it is.
Wow.
Look at that.
Is that road going to be used? Here's my curiosity. Is this like a road
one-time road? This is a one-time road?
Is it just going to the climate summit and nothing else? Because that would be truly hysterical.
If there only was a place that they could have done this climate summit.
Maybe they could have done the climate summit where they already had a road.
Right.
Maybe if there was only a place that already has roads, that they could have done the climate summit. You can't make this stuff up. This is like my act. They take private jets to decide you have to outlaw leaf blowers that are gas-powered. I mean, this is crazy. Claudio Verriquet lives about 200 meters from where the road will be. He used to make it.
What's crazy is that the government allowed companies to actually shred those trees. Just like I've mentioned with Tigard here in Canada, protected lands, heritage sites, etc. Completely got away with it even during lockdowns while other people had to stay home anyway. And they just do it willingly, and it's over money.
An income from harvesting acai. Is that how you say it? Acai?
Yeah. Acai or something?
Yeah. Some kind of berries from trees that once occupied the space. Everything was destroyed. Our harvest has already been cut down. We no longer have that income to support our family. He worries the construction. What?
Yeah, well, it's hurting the human population, so that's always a goal of
That's
that.
always good. He worries the construction of this road will lead to more deforestation in the future now that the area is more accessible for businesses. Our fear is that one day someone will come here and say, here's some money. We need this area to build a gas station or to build a warehouse, and then we'll have to leave. We were born and raised here in the community. Where are we going to go? His community won't be connected to the road given its walls on either side. For us who live on the side of the highway, there will be no benefits. There will be benefits for the trucks that will pass through. If someone gets sick and needs to go to the center of Belém, we won't be able to use it.
So it is like a one-time use, right? Great.
The road leaves two disconnected areas of protected forest. Scientists are concerned it will fragment the ecosystem and disrupt the movement of wildlife.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Professor
Maybe
Sylvia,
they'll talk about that at the summit.
a professor is a wildlife vet researcher at the University of Animal Health, said the overlooks the site of the new highway. She and her team rehabilitate wild animals with injuries predominantly caused by humans or vehicles.
Yep.
We're going to lose an area to release these animals back into the wild, the natural environment of these species. Land animals will no longer be able to cross to the other side, reducing the area where they can live and breed. The Brazilian president and environment minister said this will be a historic summit because it's a COP in the Amazon, not a COP about the Amazon. This is amazing. The president says the meeting will provide an opportunity to focus on the needs of the Amazon, to show the forest to the world and present what the federal government has done to protect it.
Are you joking?
Nope.
But the professor says that while these conversations will happen at a very high level among business people and government officials, those living in the Amazon are not being heard. The state government of Para had touted the idea of this highway known as Avienda Liberada as early as 2012, but it had repeatedly been shelved because of environmental concerns. Now a host of infrastructure projects has been resurrected or approved to prepare the city for the COP summit. The state government infrastructure secretary listed this highway as one of the 30 projects happening in the city to prepare and modernize it so we can have a legacy for the population and, more importantly, serve people for COP30 in the best possible way. Speaking to the BBC, he said it was a sustainable highway and an important mobility intervention.
Because they don't let the natives use it. That's why it's sustainable. You know how you're not supposed to fly or travel? Just these assholes? That's the sustainability. Just they'll be using it.
That's right. So this person who sells Amazonian herbal medicines in the market acknowledges that all construction work can cause problems, but he felt the future impact would be worth it. We hope the discussions aren't just on paper and become real actions, and the measures, the decisions taken really are put into practice so that the planet can breathe a little better, so that the population in the future will have a little cleaner air. That will be the hope of the world leaders, too, who choose to attend the COP30 summit. Scrutiny is growing over whether flying thousands of them across the world and the infrastructure required to host them is undermining the cause.
Well, that and all your predictions being wrong for the last 40 years. That also is undermining the cause. The fact that not a single thing that you said was going to happen
has happened
at all, and the opposite has happened. You got to cut down. There was so much forest. You had to cut it down.
To have your.
Yeah, I mean, I like sharing Jimmy Dore because everyone's been hearing about this anyways all over the news. But the way he talks about it's hilarious, right? He brings humor to it because some of these topics, right, it can really get people down if they let it. Because it just feels like it's almost hopeless, but it's not, right? From Carney to COP30. This is posted just yesterday from Grace Gerling, where an American Oak Falls maple in Brasilia grow. Climate Action welcomes the announcement of Mark Carney's appointment as Canada's next Prime Minister. Of course you do. Following his election as leader of the Liberal Party, as UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, terrifying. Following a career in finance that included serving as governor of the Bank of England, Carney focused on mobilizing private finances to the levels needed to align with the 1.5 degree Celsius goal. Mobilize private finance, friends and family, but here we go. In 2021, he formed the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, at the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, like I was mentioning before. It's even in here. In an interview at Climate Action's Climate Innovation Forum in 2023, Carney told the audiences, finance is an enabler. It is a catalyst that can pull forward action. This is really a question of scale. We are not going to have this transition unless we have mainstream finance using climate as part of every decision that they are making. This is wild. As the world faces a race against globally accelerating global warming and the extreme weather events it fuels, 2025 must be a year of bold action and transformative progress. Again, all these buzzwords. On the same day Carney took office as Canada's leader, COP30 President Designant André Arana Puro do Lago published a comprehensive letter setting the stage for the climate summit in Brazil this November, inviting the international community to join Brazil in a global global effort against climate change. A global effort of cooperation among peoples for the progress of humanity. His letter emphasized that now is the time for implementation of climate goals, including people like Bill Gates wanting to block the friggin' sun and doing it in cases. Despite persistent negative press, such as the departure of major financial institutions from key alliances, such as the UN Covenant Net Zero Banking Alliance, which fudges their numbers and lies about it, over-exaggerates what they're calling to be net zero. They're lying about their numbers. They're not accurately reporting at all their emissions at all. Driven by Trump's stark exit from the Paris Agreement and cuts to climate funding, both domestically and internationally, the global push for climate finance movement has already gained unstoppable momentum. As Correa Dolago states, lack of ambition will be judged as lack of leadership, as there will be no global leadership in the 21st century that is not defined by climate leadership. It's unbelievable. Mark Carney's appointment presents an opportunity to reinforce the truth, and drive ambitious, coordinated action on climate finance. It's all about money, and again, his wife is connected to the climate action stuff as well. And I just don't know how this is. I don't know how. I mean, we have just lost our belief in God. I don't know. The rise of climate and nature finance. Climate finance refers to local, national, or transnational financing drawn from public, private, and alternative sources of financing that seeks to support mitigation and adaptation actions that will address climate change. All of our money. It is not only imperative for protecting inhabitants and future generations in climate vulnerable countries, it provides the path for a new era of global sustainable development. According to the Climate Policy Initiative, climate finance reached 1.46 trillion in 2022. This is a business, having more than doubled from 2018 levels. CPI's analysis shows climate flows are likely to have surpassed 1.5 trillion in 2023. It absolutely did, and it's going to be even worse under Mark Carney. Again, just remember this video. However, it notes a further five-fold increase is required to reach that 7.4 trillion needed each year through 2030 under the 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario. This carbon scam and how they're treating it is just wild to me still. However, climate finance for developing countries represents a tiny fraction of these flows. Based on modeled projections using the United Nations Global Policy Model, developing countries need around 1.1 trillion in climate finance from 2025 and 1.8 trillion by 2030. So read again more of our taxpayer money that's being put on this now to also help other countries as well. That's a lot of money, Canada. The UN's climate summit that took place in Baku, Azerbaijan in November last year derived a new collective quantified goal, NCQG, to triple finance to developing countries from the previous goal of 100 billion annually to 300 billion annually by 2035. Evidently, this falls far short of the required finance. The NCQG also commits to securing efforts of all actors to work together to scale up finance to developing countries from public and private sources to the amount of 1.3 trillion per year by 2035. Talking about S&P Global Ratings, it states that expected increased issuance in low-income and emerging economies to address the climate finance gap. Climate finance gap? What are you talking about? In January, the Climate Investment Funds, CIF, again, fire everyone, Capital Markets Mechanism, CCMM, rated by Fitch and Moody's, AA+, I don't know, is a market debut. An inaugural bond raised 500 million in the back of an order book totaling more than 3 billion from investors around the world. It also talks about Goldman Sachs in here. Additionally, S&P Global Ratings report shows that transition bonds had their strongest year on record in 2024. It's all about money. Result of governance of Japan's multiple issuances. Resume negotiations of biodiversity COP16 as parties adopted a strategy for resource mobilization, identifying important guidance mechanisms and institutions needed to scale up resources from all sources for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. What is this? The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, GBF, was adopted during the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, COP15, following a 4-year consultation and negotiation process. This historic framework, which supports the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and builds on the Convention's previous strategic plans, sets out on an ambitious pathway to reach the global vision of a world living in harmony with nature by 2050. This is such a joke. Yeah, in your 15-minute cities that you're claiming to be carbon neutral. Among the framework's key elements are 4 goals for 2050 and 23 targets for 2030. Supported through a comprehensive package of decisions adopted at COP15. Enhanced mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting, and receiving implementation. The necessary financial resources for implementation, strategic frameworks for capacity development. Yeah, very interesting. All right, the strategy which we'll look at to close biodiversity. Okay, enough. The figure 200 billion each year by 2030 is crucially the minimum investment required to truly shift the trajectory for biodiversity, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization (FAO). Bloomberg NEF recently reported that around 1.15 trillion in biodiversity financial flows will be needed in 2030 to restore and maintain biodiversity. More tax money, more, for nothing, and actually making things worse, clearly. 100 billion. The Tropical Forest Forever facility. Innovative financial mechanisms continue to emerge, bolstered by collective action. The Tropical Forest Forever facility, ironic, TFFF, is an example of a new model of funding presented by Brazil during COP28 in Dubai. The TFFF would address the market failure that has led to deforestation on a mass scale by rewarding developing countries that conserve their tropical forests. It will pay for each hectare of standing vegetation and include penalties for each deforested or degraded hectare. Do you see the irony in this with COP30, how they have actually taken a lot of hectares away from the Amazon rainforest in unprotected land? Very interesting that they're doing the opposite of that. And they could have went anywhere else that is already available to do these meetings, but of course not. And it's taxpayers' money yet again. And they fearmonger and they make it seem like it's not your money. They make like the government's money and like no, your money, my money. Yeah. Anyway, get on my Instagram again because this is a solar farm. Photos reveal dramatic aftermath of tornado hitting a solar farm. Like, look at that damage. And again, clearly in some kind of like a wind zone. And completely destroyed, right? So just more waste of resources needlessly that is actually creating pollution and blocking soil. Yeah. I'm interested in this stuff because like I did, like I worked with the LCBO as a security contractor. I was the one that was, well, the training coordinator. I was the one that was training the security guards. And anyway, 5 men arrested in connection to an organized, prolific theft ring targeting the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, the LCBO. So good job on whoever arrested them. So this is from RFKJ, who I think may have, again, too much of a bias based on a certain, based on certain individuals that are making Zionists look very evil. But this is Concerned Citizen. I call them tanker terminators. We are paid more than any other pilot. Chemtrail pilot whistleblower. So someone like a pilot actually admitted that. And again, there's financial incentive in this. These are unethical, immoral people that are intentionally dropping harmful chemicals on people and all living organisms, and they're getting away with it. And again, it's just, we need more exposure with this. So I'm convinced the majority of them are remotely operated. This tech obviously exists, and there's way too many. And it's people hiring private companies so that there's no trail. And then, so RFKJ, so he said that we are going to stop this crime. And so that would be very interesting if finally it becomes more mainstream that this is actually friggin' happening, because there's way too many people that are exposing this. Way too many people are exposing this. It's not letting me share again. I froze.